And welcome to Morning Coffee with Brigid. I'm Brigid Burke, and today is the 22nd of August, so we are moving into the beginning of Virgo season for real. This should be the first day. I don't remember the exact time that everything's going to shift. When I was up early this morning, and I was down making coffee at about 5, a little before 5, I happened to open the front door and look outside, and I was able to see Mars and Jupiter kind of next to each other in the sky. I took a photo, so I will probably post that one later on. I did get a message from a friend last night where she was saying something about, well, I was watching this thing, like Jupiter's doing something and Saturn's doing something, and of course, she's somebody who was, I think, good morning, Sam. She was a friend who was very affected by this Grand Cross because she's Gemini, and so I was like, yeah, Jupiter and Saturn were definitely doing something. So I'm going to, but I was just saying I had taken a photo of Jupiter and Mars in the sky together this morning because I just opened my front door and looked outside. Such a nice day here. We're having this October-like weather, morning. Got the cup of Joe here. Actually, this is my third cup, so I'm a little caffeinated. Yesterday, actually, after the live stream, I got to be very I got headachy. I had, and what I've noticed now is that headaches, I'm calling them kind of punctuation marks between stages. So it's like I'll get these headaches, and then it's like, so I'll have a day, like yesterday I was like not, after this, I did the live stream, and actually I have not been uploading the live streams to YouTube, so I better get caught up on that today. So apologies to people who want to watch this again on YouTube. I know it's something I should upload every day, but because I have 2 channels, and one of my Google accounts is also linked to my work account. So what happens in my work account now, they have like 20 layers of security, which is fine. I mean, I guess from the point of view of not wanting people to hack your stuff. But it's like, then when I sign out, then it signs me out of the SAML thing, and then I have to go back in, and I have to like redo everything and go through and put all these codes in all these places just to get back in where I was. So this is why I kind of, I'm not on the Liminal Tarot channel as much as because it's not attached to that account. When I sign out, then it's like I got to go back and re-enter everything again. So, I mean, it's not that it's that big of a deal, but if I'm in one of those modes where I'm trying to do a lot of things at once, I'm just kind of like, all right, I'll do that later, So I kind of put that off. Good morning, Joanne. So yeah, it's another beautiful day, and the topic that I'm going to have today is actually going to be the topic of inspiration, and this is something that I'm going to talk about because it's kind of hit this morning, and some of this is going to be related to the school that I'm opening and other ideas that I have for it, because I was putting down ideas I want to make a Kickstarter video. I'm going to probably make a long form one that's going to be on YouTube. And I'm going to have I think on Kickstarter itself, you can't have more than like a minute or something like that. So I need to kind of put like a highlights reel together like I would have here. Good morning, Suda. And I, like kind of like a highlights reel that I would have on, just to have on Kickstarter for that. And then I would have a fuller video that I would just put the link to, and then people could go and watch what I'm doing. So I'm like, I'm definitely in a much better space today than I was yesterday, because yesterday I had that terrible, after this was done, I kind of had this terrible migraine all day. So I was kind of glad that it was a day, Wednesdays I do take appointments, but it happened to be a day where I didn't have any, so I was like, well, good, then I can just kind of sleep and rest up and put ice on the side of my head, because it's one of those headaches that that any kind of headache medication doesn't help. My sister has told me that she has a migraine medication that she gets by prescription. She's like, well, I could give you one. And, but I said, well, I said, thanks, but I don't know. I don't really want to, I don't like taking drugs for things if I don't have to. And I don't, because I just don't, I'm already, like I said, I'm already a crummy eater, so it's like I really don't need to put things in. I had a migraine bad yesterday too. And part of it may even just be the weather too, but like I was saying, I said, I feel like my headaches tend to punctuate different periods of time. Like I go through a period where it's like something ends, I get the migraine, and then something else happens. Like there's something weird about that, like with the body. The other thing I'm going to mention quickly before I get into today's topic, which, as I mentioned, was inspiration, is that I talked about a message yesterday from Azrael for a particular person who I feel does watch this channel, and even though they don't participate in the live stream or anything, but I do think they watch the, even though, like, again, I'm sure if I asked them about it, they'd be like, oh no, I don't know anything about it. So, in any case, that's fine. But I just had, but I got a message from Azrael this morning, and what was the exact words that he used? Sorry, there goes my pen. It was, this book is very heavy, so sorry, it's making my camera go like this. It was Tia Dazis Babbage was the words. And and I actually started to laugh because that literally means his head is south. So my first thought is like, you've got your head up your arse or whatever, but actually he said, no, more like an ostrich, more like head is in the sand. And I was like, so in other words, like, I feel like that message got through, but it was kind of like, okay, I don't know what that is, and I'm just gonna stick my head in the sand, pretend that that wasn't said. So anyway, that was just really funny that came up this morning. And I'm not really concerned about it because I always feel like if there's something that's with that, if I'm being connected to a particular person, and I feel like there's some reason that something has to come about. Then when the time is right for that, whatever that is to come together, it will come together. Like, something might be pointed out to me, but it might not be necessarily that, oh, it's going to happen right now. A lot of people tend to feel that way. When people see something like that, or they see an opportunity, they say, oh, okay, we're going to make this all happen right now. And sometimes it's just like, no, like you're kind of getting a little view down the road, but things may not be informed to do whatever they're meant to do yet, but it could just be that there's preliminary things or things you're establishing that kind of will work towards whatever that is. And I have asked the question, I'm like, so what is it about this connection? And they're like, we're not going to tell you. I was like, oh, okay. So anyway, just putting that aside and out of the way, I keep bumping out. Okay. Okay. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not entirely sure what you mean by that, but I think you're probably talking about the headaches and stuff, and just certain things. Okay. So the topic. Okay. So thinking about inspiration this morning, and again, I don't know if the weather is really what the inspiration is right now for me. But I just woke up, and it was normally times I have to sit down and I do readings and stuff. I'm like, okay, what am I going to talk about this morning? I didn't really have to do that today. It was just like, I just woke up and it just like, there's just ideas that are just right there. And so I did write do some poetry writing this morning. No, the stream is raining my Wi-Fi. It's raining my Wi-Fi as well. Oh, you keep bumping out. Got it. Okay. Understood. Okay. Now I get it. So, if worse comes to worse, you can always rewatch this. So if get the whole thing, if you lose me at any point. So, so I wrote some stuff this morning, and I also got some ideas, as I mentioned at the beginning, for this Kickstarter that I want to do for this school. Now, let me talk a little bit about that for a minute, because it's a school where I've already talked about how there's going to be like lecture and workshop on subjects related to the feminine in particular, and also the reworking of mythology, reworking of other stories and myths, things that we may have seen as cautionary tales or scary things or negative things, and saying, no, let's find that material and rework it into something that is useful to us in this time frame when we're moving out of one cycle and into another one. So the other thing that came to me this morning is like, yes, the lectures are definitely a good place to start, but I'm also thinking I want to have like a writer's workshop as well. Now, one of the things about me in my many, in the things I've gone to school for, besides religion, psychology, stuff like that, my other tack, my second major actually in undergrad, and also technically what my grad degree is in, is literature. Okay, and I'm a huge fan of in particular of contemporary poetry. And when we say contemporary, we're in the 21st century now. So when I was an undergraduate, it was contemporary would have been 20th century, right? Because I went to school in the early 90s. And so when we think quote unquote contemporary, we're actually thinking like 100 years ago probably at this point, or maybe a little later than that, maybe 50, 60 years ago. 60, 70, something like that. So we're looking at, I'm looking particularly at like confessional poets like Robert Lowell, like Sylvia Plath, whom I have a strong attachment to. And I think one of the things that my friend's going to cover is Anne Sexton. But the ones who really kind of stand out to me, Elizabeth Bishop is one who really stands out to me. Elizabeth Bishop's Geography 3 is probably one of the greatest poetry books ever, in my opinion. And there's just something about the way she writes. Elizabeth Bishop it's interesting because she's put very few poetry books out. Maybe there was 3 or 4 over her entire lifetime. And she's considered to be one of the great poets. I mean, was she? I'm trying to remember if she was actually poet laureate. I know Robert Lowell was, and I don't remember if she was or not. But she, she taught at Harvard. I mean, although she didn't really care for that, she preferred to be in South America. She was having, she had a lesbian relationship at a time when that was not very acceptable, like in the 50s and 60s. And, but it's interesting. Like, I remember studying all of her correspondence with Robert Lowell in grad school because the two of them were good friends and they kind of critiqued each other. So they are actually always a good illustration of, poetry critique. Now, Lowell's style was very confessional. Okay, so he was somebody who, like his poems, like Skunk Hour is one of my favorite poems by him. And it was interesting because the critiques of that, the literary criticism, tended to get very, very personal because apparently Lowell was manic depressive. And some people were seeing that in the poem. And he's like, be that as it may, I don't think that was really the intention of the poem. Because this was a class we had took on biography and poetry, like whether or not, how much biography can you read into what a poet writes? And is it really appropriate to do that? That's where I discovered the book about Sylvia Plath, like Frida Kahlo. Yeah, well, that's it. Yeah, I mean, people. Frida Kahlo had a very, very hard life as an artist. I mean, but it was. But they had. but the thing was that I remember Bishop was somebody who was not. She was not confessional. She did talk about things in her life. There's a New Yorker article where she talks about, where she had a very difficult life too. She had her father died young. Her mother ended up being put in institution. She ended up living with her grandparents in Nova Scotia. Then she got sent to Boston with her relatives, which is where all her health problems started. She started with eczema. She started with all these things because she was out of the space in which she felt comfortable. And she was kind of nomadic her whole life. I mean, she would go to Boston, she would go to New York, but she preferred to be in South America. And then she went all these kind of different places. And but she was somebody. She would always critique Robert Lowell because she's like, you give too much of yourself away in these poems. You know what I mean? And he felt that a lot of them. And again, I mean, I don't think either point of view is wrong. Some people feel that poetry is the outlet for that kind of thing. Other people feel that, it needs to be something, that there's something more abstract that needs to be kind of subtly expressed there and not necessarily just said, out loud, just spoken. There's a wonderful series for anybody. It's called the Voices and Visions series. Okay. And it was a poetry series that was done, I want to say it was probably done in the late 80s. But it is so, so good. And the thing that's really, really good about it is not just that they're talking about different poets, because they are talking about a lot of different poets, including the ones that I've just mentioned. But it's the way the cinematography is done. It's the way that the attention to detail that's paid in when they're trying to convey certain images or certain impressions from the life of a particular poet. It's just that itself is kind of, I don't know what the word is. I mean, sublime may or may not be the right word because sublime implies a kind of terror, but there's just something about it that just the way in which, okay, we've talked about how rationality and speech, how we can talk things to death, we can discourse things to death, we can analyze, we can dissect, but that there's something in nature that has to do with image, like the way in which an image is conveyed. And within poetry, that's what separates poetry from prose. Poetry is not just a long ramble. It's not like all rhyming couplets. Like a lot of people think of poems as, oh, you make things in a rhyme. No, I mean, there are poems that are in a style that does include rhyming, but not all of them are like that. And poetry is meant to convey an image in as few words as possible, rather than just be, because then it turns into a prose piece. And who was it? I had a professor in grad school called Bob Carnival, and it was funny. I brought this Voices and Visions series up in the class because we were talking. This is a class we were poetry workshopping, learning how to write poetry, and he's the best poetry teacher I've ever had, because he would go through your portfolio of stuff, and he was the one who was always like, less is more, less is more. But he always did it in a way that was never critical, in the sense of like, oh, this poem's a piece of crap, like, and again, I don't know that he actually ever thought that, but you know what I mean? It's like, he would never say that to somebody. He would always say like, well, okay, this piece you have over here is good. This one, maybe, maybe you want to tighten that up, or, he was good at critiquing people without making them feel like, oh, they couldn't do it or something, because poetry is very hard to write. If you want to write, if you're trying to, the question is, how much do you follow form? A lot of people feel like there's a lot of free form poetry now, so a lot of people don't feel that they necessarily have to write within iambic pentameter, or whether they have to write within a particular style, like a villanelle or or just a. I'm trying to think some of the other styles off the top of my head, but you don't have to necessarily write in those styles, although knowing some of the theory is helpful in terms of cadence and rhythm and things like that. I love professors like that. Yeah, Drew has really, really good faculty, for the most part. I would say that they have, like, I learned a lot from everybody there. They have some really spectacular people. And, but I remember in his class when I mentioned the Voices and Visions series, he lit up and he's like, I was a consultant on that series. Like, I'm not surprised at all. But it is so, so good. They're all on, I think most of them are on YouTube. So, if you even look that up, even if you look up certain poets and things, they're worth watching, even if you're not like totally into the poetry, because just the way that the cinematography, the way that they use image in connection with talking about the poet and the life of the poet, it's like poetic itself, and it's really hard to put into words. But see, that to me that's when you're kind of getting to the reality of things. When something is very hard to put into words, it's a feeling, it's a space, and it's hard for you to just articulate and say, oh, it's this, or oh, it's that, or we can talk about it in some kind of concrete way that, oh, it's this thing and it's that thing. We can only say that it's like something, it was like like Ezra Pound's, like in the station at the Metro, the appearance of the faces in the crowd, petals on a wet black bough. Like, that's literally the entire poem. It just conveys an image, and it's a metaphor, but it's not saying this is like this. It does it in a way that kind of puts you there, and that's something that I think is. That's a special skill. People who can just do that automatically are people I think are really kind of more tuned in. It's similarly, I think people who write music can be like that as well. They're kind of, you're tuned in more to the sound or the frequency of things, and not so much in of what really is, rather than just looking at something and saying, oh, this is this thing in front of me, and this is what it is, and this is what, and this is what's been said, and this is this, and this and this. It's like, it's not so, we value facts, and we value, what's scientific to a point, which again is fine. I mean, it has its place for certain things and certain applications, certainly in terms of, for example, understanding certain things maybe going on with our health, maybe certain things going on, understanding certain things that are going on in nature, in terms of, say, weather patterns or things like that. I mean, there's a lot that science does that helps us live the kind of life that we live. So it's not that you want to discount that, but a lot of times we kind of feel that there's nothing else besides that. almost lulled into the space with word sounds and meter and imagery. Yeah, yes, and that's one of the things about this series that I'm talking about. Like one of my favorite poems is The Moose by Elizabeth Bishop, and it's a pretty long poem. But in the Voices and Visions thing, there's a woman who's narrating that poem. Now, they kind of break it up, and then the best part, they end up bringing Mark Strand in. Now, Mark Strand has passed away now, so anyway, R.I.P. But he was a great poet. He was a Canadian poet. But I'm like, no, I wanted this woman to narrate this piece. I didn't want him to narrate it, because he doesn't do as good of a job. And he keeps interrupting it, trying to explain it. I'm like, stop that. Just let it be. Stop trying to explain the poem. But it's this poem about, and it seems to be about the time she's leaving her grandparents' house and journeying to Boston. And it literally, by late afternoon, this bus journeys west. And, it's kind of like, what was it? How does she put it? About, grandparents' voices, uninterruptedly talking in eternity. She says, things being mentioned, things cleared up finally, what he said, she said. I mean, this is actual poem. Who got pensioned, deaths and sicknesses, the year he remarried, the year something happened, and she goes into this whole thing, that peculiar affirmative, yes, a sharp indrawn breath, half groan, half acceptance, that means life's like that, we know it, also death. Now, it took her 20 years to write this poem, okay? So people who write a poem and think that they have to have it right, she tinkered with the words because the words had to feel exactly right. And if she wasn't satisfied with it, somebody else might have looked at it and said, yeah, it's fine. She's just like, no, it has to be exactly right. And literally, I cannot hear that poem without like a recitation of that poem, like a good recitation. Like I literally just like, it's like it just brings everything up in you. Like it's just like tears and it's just that's what good poetry is. I think there was somebody on, if you ever follow that, Humans of New York, it's that thing where they take photographs of people and then they kind of have a little blurb. And one of them was a woman who was doing her PhD at NYU, like on the subway, and somebody stopped her, and when she said that's what she was doing, they said, well, what makes a good poem? And she said, a good poem is one when you are a different person after you are done hearing it. And, we said that's kind of a tall order. But in any case, it made me think a lot about inspiration, because real inspiration like that really gives you an insight into the way life is, in addition, outside of all the day-to-day stuff that we think about, like the things that really make your soul connect with the world, that's an expression of that. And that is something that comes out of whatever we call source. It's an inspiration. And it's not something, yes, you can be, they will talk about, like if you take writing classes about, okay, you want to practice a certain amount of each day. You want to write things. You want to be disciplined about, meter and cadence and rhythm and stuff like that. Like you would be writing a song. Now, sometimes you can get an inspiration that's completely, like all of a sudden, like a whole thing just, appears in front of you and you're able to write it and it's perfect. Okay? That's very rare. You'll get some inspiration, you'll see images, you'll get ideas, and then later on, generally, you go back and you rework it. I think a lot of the problem, too, is I've talked about the problem that people are very perfectionist about things, like, I have to get it right the first time. And it's like, no, you're not going to get it right the first time. You just want to let it flow. Because then what it is that's what I talk about, the mind coming in and trying to take too much control of the process. And I think if people want to experience life, just really the wonder of life, and not just waking up every day being anxious about, oh, okay, I've got this list to do today, am I going to do this, am I going to do that, da, da, da. Or, like I said, if we're in a moment of change, when we're moving between one state and another, and we don't know anything, it's almost like we just have to stop worrying about what's the thing that we're going to do. How is our mind going to jump in and organize and plan this and fix it? It's like, maybe you just need to sit back and let source talk to you, like let it come through in whatever form. I'm talking about this in a poetic form. It can come through with some other way too. And that is a bit of a problem of being overplanned, because we may say I have had days like when I was working 14-hour days where I would suddenly have an inspiration for something and it's like, but I'm driving to work or I'm about to go into a meeting and I'm like, well, I oh, but I have these 10 things I have to do today, so I have to put that inspiration off to later. And by that time, it's gone. And I don't even remember what the heck it was I was going to say or what I was going to write. And again, inspiration, it also doesn't have to be, as I've mentioned many times, we don't always have to write things that we're going to show to other people. They could be just things we're writing for ourselves. But nonetheless, it's like, and it doesn't even always have to be writing, but there's like this expression of the soul that goes on. This is what the humanities are for. And this kind of gets back to my school idea, because I'm like, I want this to be a school of the humanities. I mean, yes, myth is kind of what I'm structuring it around, but it's not just, because myth has to do with the narratives that we have in our culture. And then generally, our inspirations, those mythical narratives convey universal truths, okay? Some of them uncomfortable, some of them just more profound. And again, it's a language that if you read it too directly and in too much of a social way, you could miss the point of it. And, things are about like, just a simple example, the myth of Persephone, okay? People start applying it to, essay with women and stuff like that, and men and women and how, men treat women and so forth. I'm like, no, this is trying to convey the experience of moving from, totally understand where you're going. My undergrad is educational studies. Yeah, and but with the Persephone myth, it's kind of like you are... it's like, okay, it's really trying to convey the feeling of being moved from childhood to entering what we think of as young womanhood. When you are entering that phase, when you are able to bear children and everything that goes along with that, all the body changes that go along with that. Going into menstruation, it's almost like, is if I think back to that period of time in my life, that's the way it almost feels. It almost feels like an abduction. Like you were, with this happy kid playing one day, and suddenly the next day you're in this totally different space. And now you feel like you're in this playing field where everybody's socially comparing each other's. Love it. That has the potential of a badass curriculum. Yeah, and we do have a badass curriculum so far. And what I want to add to it is the idea of having like a writing workshop. I want to see if my friend Max wants to get in on that. He might be too busy, but I really want to start looking at some of this stuff. And remember, Bob Carnival told me he was going to do a class that I thought, the idea I thought was fantastic, because he said, rather than making it like specifically a poetry class or a prose writing class, we're going to have prompts, and then people, whatever form it comes out in, whether it comes out as a poem, whether it comes out as prose, whether it comes out as an essay, like whatever it's going to come out as. When I say prose, I mean fictional prose. But whatever it's going to come out as, let it come out. And let's just see, like rather than trying to say to yourself, oh, I have to force myself. Yeah, like, wow, I'm going to force myself to be a poet. Like if poetry is not a natural mode for you of expression, and you feel like you can't write because you're not doing poems, then maybe you should spend more time developing prose. Maybe, and maybe later the other will develop itself. It's just, we, and understanding that we need structure for things, that's kind of the paradox of freedom, is that there's limitation, but it's like trying to find spaces for inspiration. And I think that's what I want to do here with this school, is I want people to be able to tap into their own inspiration and not feel that because it's not perfect or it's not this form, or, oh, I don't think it's that great. I mean, it's the same way with art. I mean, I took watercolor courses. Now, compared to great I don't rate myself as a great watercolorist, but I still like the stuff that I do. And I have some pieces that I remember that I've done, where my art teacher was just like, the writer-poet scene is pretty cool in New Jersey, with poetry nights and stuff. Yeah, actually there has been kind of a scene in New Jersey, and it's kind of changed over the years. There have been different people who have kind of headed that up at different institutions. I seem to remember there was a whole thing at County College Morris years ago, and I feel like he was a professor that my ex-husband had, but I don't know, he might even be retired and gone by now. But I know that's something that's kind of, I think that's of interest to people. And I think trying to have a forum for that where people can produce something and say, hey, I've had academics who've looked at it. Not that an academic is going to tell you, oh, you have to change this, or you can't do this, or you can't do that. Not that kind of a thing. But just somebody else who might be able to help you, flesh your idea out, help provide some of that structure for your inspiration. Okay? You took drawing. Yeah, drawing is something I would love to be good at, but I know there's a whole thing. If I on perspective and things like that, that's hard for me. I do actually have charcoal and drawing materials too, and like I said, I have painted. But I had an art teacher who had told me. She said, some of my paintings, she would just be like, oh, well, that's interesting, and of course, yeah, okay. So she feels about that. But other ones, she was like, that's good. Don't change that. She would just like, yeah, that was just it. That's so wonderful. The culture is limited, but the scenery is amazing. Well, yeah, and Joanne, where you are, like near the mountains and stuff, there's a lot of inspiration that can be had there of all types, both in terms of visual art, in terms of just being able to connect with nature, in terms of, even like folklore and so forth. I've been reading a lot about Appalachian folklore recently, and it's just fascinating. All of these things are these kinds of different corners of life that are not just the dry, mundane, causal facts of things. Inspiration is something, it's like love. It's something that's just going to kind of come in and come out, So, I don't know. So anyway, I felt like I was inspired to talk about inspiration today. And I've been doing some things. And also just to kind of mention that this, I think I'm waiting until Mercury retrograde's over, but I want to put this Kickstarter out like next week, because that's when Mercury retrograde ends next Monday. So today's going to actually be a total literary day between working on that and working on, I still have editorial projects to finish. They've been, because of all the other stuff that went on last week, they've kind of been put off. It's funny, I was organizing my desk drawer and a mantra card popped out and it was about inspiring creativity. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, there you go. There's your synchronicity of the day, right? Yeah, and our center card today is playfulness, okay? Because when you have inspiration come in, it's a kind of play. It's an idea that comes in and then you play with that idea. It's like, okay, what can we potentially do with this? And when you're doing play, it's not like there's a right and wrong way to do it. Again, this is not like we're playing a structured sport where there's rules. It's just like, see where you go with it. Yeah, indeed. Wow. So, yeah. And the inner feeling of which we're unaware is the master card. Okay. So yeah, there's the inspiration, right? The master, whatever the master is for you. The master could be the guru for some people. The master could be just, whatever guides you have. The master could just be your own inner voice. Okay. But a master can also be somebody who is a mentor, who comes in, who's able to kind of show you a path forward. Okay. And again, that could be a lot of different people. Sometimes, I've often said that a lot of times we can be vehicles for the master. Where I might, people have said to me like, oh, like especially when it comes to my guru, if certain people have certain things or certain people, come into these certain spaces, they'll say to me, oh, you did this, Amma used you as her vehicle, like that kind of a thing. Like, yeah, sometimes we can be a vehicle for the master as well. The external feeling of which we're aware here, oh, and good morning, is the maturity card. This is the Ace of Pentacles, okay? So, okay, just to recap, we've got playfulness in the center, and we're talking about creativity and inspiration here. We've got the master within, that's what we don't see, and externally we've got the maturity. So this, again, this is the experience, but also it's Ace of Pentacles, so this is about planting something new. This is about a new space in which we can connect. And remember, we've been talking in these past weeks about moving out of an old space where we were still dealing with old karmas, old problems, things that kept coming around, and then we had the final pieces, and it's like, okay, now it's the point of which, okay, if you've finished with all that stuff, you've got all that backdrop, you've got all of that experience, now it's like you've got this kind of maturity to kind of to break new ground, to build a new structure, to do something new here. And our card again, we got this again, is ordinariness, the Eight of Pentacles. And this card is just, this is a woman like she's picking some kind of fruit, it looks like. But it's just, just being ordinary. It's not about trying to be, and that's actually an important part of creativity. You don't need to try to be extraordinary. It's not just like, oh, I have to have this great thing that's going to blow everybody's mind. Maybe you will. But if you don't, it doesn't matter. It's just letting the soul talk. I guess is what it comes down to. Letting the soul talk is what a lot of it is. And it doesn't matter, again, and being present in the moment. Well, that's certainly part of it, yes. But you would have to be in that moment, and you have to let it happen. You can't just say, oh, wow, like I said earlier, like this inspiration, but I got to get to work now, so I'll put that off till later. No, you want to be in that moment. That's why one of the things I like about working from home is that I can, if I need to drop things because something suddenly comes up, it's like, okay, I feel like I have to do this now. I have to write this down now. This is so unclear to me. I know it's there, but I don't know if it's there for me. It's unclear. Well, yes, because it's unclear because it's not something that falls into the clear-cut kind of factual world that we're in. It's just something that either flies in and flies out. And I think if our lives are taken up by certain things all day, you're raising a family and going to work, going to job, it's like, we have these things, and so our mind is on those things all the time. So there's not that quiet moment of inspiration. Now, if you do end up doing more meditation and so forth, this might actually make more sense to you, because you may have those moments where you still the mind. And again, if you haven't taken Amma's I Am meditation, you can take that for free online. Just go to amma.org and look up IAM. And, that I always feel like once you've met her and so forth, that's like a next good step for people. And because you do get to a point where you learn how to just still the mind. And when you do that, those are the moments in which that can potentially come in. And it doesn't have to be, again, it can be something very ordinary. It doesn't have to be extraordinary. It doesn't like we have to have this big experience that now we have to try to write down. It can be about the most ordinary things. Sylvia Plath used to write about normal stuff, like, making dinner and, looking after the kids. Like, it doesn't have to be about extraordinary stuff. It just has to be about what's almost sublime about just living in this world and living in this experience. We're in our heads so much that we miss most of it. And so this is kind of a way, this inspiration is like a way, it's like a little portal, it's like a little door to take us kind of back to that space. Our outcome too is courage, okay? We have the strength card, courage. So yeah, and that's interesting though that you say that, because you see that there's the rocks here and then there's the flower pushing out of the rocks. It's kind of like, and that's almost perfectly expressing what you're saying. They're feeling like, I don't know, do I have any inspiration? Do I have any of this? And this is almost like, it seems like it's a barren space, but something does pop through it. It is there. Now that doesn't, and again, wow, yeah. It doesn't always have to mean that that's the way you express yourself. As I've said, everybody has a different form of creativity. Because I happen to have a background in lit, that's what I focus on. But for other people, it could be something else. They could be drawn to painting. They could be drawn to music. They could be drawn to dance. There's other ways of expressing it that don't just have to be writing. That just happens to be the thing I'm most proficient at. And like I said, I've learned art. I had a very, very good art teacher who was also somebody who worked on my dissertation. Her name's Liana Peeler, and she's a wonderful artist, watercolorist. Like a lot of her stuff is shown. And again, these are all people who are very good at guiding you through creative process without, like, they would kind of critique it in the sense of like, oh, well, maybe you want to think a little more about this or this, but not in the sense of saying like, no, you're doing it wrong. I forget who it was who had told me that there was a teacher, I don't know if it was one of their kids had a teacher like this, but you will sometimes see art and creative writing teachers, especially like in the K through 12 system, who will come in and will say like, no, you drew that cloud wrong. Telling you, no, that picture's wrong. Or was one of my friend's daughters had written a story about, I forget what it was about. It had to do with some kind of theme, and I forget what it was about. It might have even, I don't know if it was about schizophrenia, if it was about something like, she was trying to like convey something about something like that. And she had put a character who had like red shoes or something. And the teacher basically gave her a lower grade, and she goes, those shoes should have been blue. Like, what does that even mean? Like, why are you, like, and she's literally like, she had me read it. She's like, excuse me? Like, am I, you know, because you will have people who try to tell you that your version of creativity is doing it wrong. And a good teacher of these kinds of things is not somebody who tells you you're doing it wrong. Yeah, what? Exactly. Like, what? Like, but, and sometimes I think too, you will get sometimes, you can get creative types who, depending on their other background, could also be very competitive. And if they see something that's good, rather than encouraging, they want to kind of make you feel like, no, you're not going to be better than me. And people like that should never be teachers. Same with the magic community. You know what I mean? Yes, I totally know what you mean. And that's one of the reasons people often say to me, why aren't you more involved with that community? I said, precisely because of that. I'm like, I know I've been doing this for a long time. I know how it needs to be done. And Joanne, no comment. Yeah. And so there's certain people that I connect with who I know, we can openly share. There's other people who are very, very rigid. And, and this is why I just kind of like, you know what? I don't think you can, have the right to tell people. Well, my daughter had an art teacher who had her fill in white space like first grade, and my daughter was complaining to me saying there's no place to breathe. Wow. Oh my gosh. It's like, yeah, that's an interesting comment. The idea that you want that white space to breathe. See, that's a really inspired way to think about it. And actually, that's a really insightful comment for somebody in first grade. Yeah, exactly. Really smart. Because that's it. We always, and think about that. That is metaphorical. We always have to fill in the space with something, right? We can't just leave an empty space. We have to fill the void, you know? And she's just like, no, why do I have to fill in this void? Why can't I just let it be the space that it is? That's okay. So your daughter's actually, yeah, she's got it right. That probably says literally what I'm trying to do. Don't let whatever's going to come into that space. If you fill the space in with all this stuff, then there's no space to breathe, and there's no space for that inspiration to come in. Yeah, wow. That's incredibly profound, to tell her that she's incredibly profound. Yes. Oh, and learn so much from the kiddos. 100%. That's what people tell you. You need to listen to children because they know they haven't been as tainted as the rest of us. But also what Sam and Joanne are saying there about that community. Yeah. No. That's a whole separate discussion. But yeah, I know. And I know that is something that will scare a lot of people off from these communities because there are people who are very competitive or people who want to say that they know it better than you or that the gatekeepers of this deity or that deity. And I've had plenty to say about that on the Cotonia side of the house. But okay, so I just pulled an extra Gateway Oracle card. Our card is standing firm today. Okay, and I'll tell you what the meaning of this is. That's funny because it kind of almost goes along with the Courage card. And it says, there are times to step down and times to negotiate, but the situation doesn't pertain to those. Need to hold high the banner of truth, grace, and compassion. Honor your values without denying the values of others. Remember what's truly important in life and let go of everything else. Yes. Oh, critics abound everywhere. And the thing is, though, when people critique a lot, it's because there's different reasons that people are overly critical of things. It's like you are either people who are very insecure and have to kind of impose their way or their agenda on things. Spiritual communities you have to watch out too because they're spiritual gatekeepers and delusions of grandeur. Yeah, there are people who want to make themselves into little messiahs, and that is something that even Carl Jung had said. That's the negative side of what he calls the self archetype. That's when you get into that space where you may have learned something or may have had an experience, and now you're the expert and you're going to teach everybody else. And it's just like, no, you're not. That's what I said. I've often said with Amma, when people would go to her and say, oh, Amma, I had this wonderful vision of the Devi and I had this and that. And she goes, yeah, she's like, yeah, don't pay any attention to it. Don't pay any attention to it. Because back to ordinariness, right? I mean, we're talking about ordinariness in the creative process, but also in the sense of you just be an ordinary person. You're not, don't go out there and be like, I'm going to be the best, I'm going to be extraordinary, I'm going to be this, I'm going to be that. It's like, if you are, you just will be. You don't need to, people will notice. If you have to convince people of that, if you have to, that's why I'm not big on salesmanship of this kind of stuff. And that's also, by the way, why I don't teach anything of magical practice to other people, because I'm just like, I don't, even in writing the book that I had written this past year, which I don't know if it's ever going to come out at this point, because I've heard literally Theon seems to be putting nothing out this year, but we got the Hermit card yesterday, right? Yes, we did get the Hermit card. Well, or at least that was the jumping off card. Yeah, this a kind of being a light unto yourself, right? And yeah, and loneliness. Yeah, and you know what? That also brings to mind. I'm at the end of the live stream, but I'm kind of going on here. That also brings to mind what was said in the legends of King Arthur. One of the things they talked about, the Knights of the Round Table, what they all agreed to is they all leave and they all have to take a path that other people have not followed in their quests. They all have to take a path, and there's the metaphor of that is just, yeah, you have to go through and blaze your own trail. You're walking on unmarked trails. You're cutting through underbrush. You're doing something new. Now, again, not everything about it necessarily will be entirely new. Yeah. But you have to blaze your own trail. And so when you live an authentic life, there can be something very lonely about it because it's not something that falls in with the social norm. But it's interesting because when you look at it, there's a lot of people who are not following the social norm. So there's always like a tribe for what you're doing. It's just that you have to be careful because sometimes people, depending on where they are in that journey, some people may think that they have, because we are raised in a culture that says you really needed it. Good. I'm glad this was helpful today. But they get into this headspace where they have discovered something, and because we live in a society that tells us there's only one truth, or that's the religious sense. There's one God, one truth, one this. There can only be one right way to do things. Highlander, there can be only one, right? It's not. There's not only one way. And that's the whole point. And what makes this such a wonder is the fact that everybody can kind of do it in a different way. And it's that weaving. That's why I talk about Tantra. It's about weaving. They all kind of weave together in their own way. And they make a picture that is the collective of all of the, the unique paths that we follow. If everybody kind of does the same thing, then you just kind of have this flat, dull, what was it? Indeed, that's why I went the way I did with Joyful Empowerment. I hated that show. Oh, okay. Yeah, I loved it. Yeah. It was, so anyway, I'm glad that this is helpful, or getting us to think about these kind of things, because ultimately this is about, because I keep seeing a lot of that now. Like, I think we've all been through some profound changes recently with all the different kind of work that we're doing. And in those profound changes, we need to kind of recognize that sometimes we just need to have that empty space, like Suda's daughter saying, you don't have to color in the whole space. Have the empty space and allow whatever that inspiration, whatever form it takes, to come in. And that's why I will often recommend meditation and so forth, because it's like, okay, you want to, because like I said, meditation doesn't mean you have to have like an hour of emptying your mind. It could be 10 seconds of emptying your mind. That 10 seconds has a profound effect. If you just have a space where you have allowed something to come in, if you shut all the doors to that because you're too busy with this and with that, then inspiration doesn't have a place to come in. It could knock on the window, but it doesn't really have a place to come in. And I feel like that's what it's saying here. And when I see standing firm and being courageous, I think it's also trying to say that a lot of us, I think, who are on our own path and not doing the standard thing. I mean, you can still be ordinary and not do the standard thing. You know what I mean? Being ordinary doesn't mean just following the herd necessarily. And we know what goes on with the herds. 20 seconds of Zen, I use it for my clients and friends. Yeah. And that's it. And sometimes, and people do, and that's the other thing too, people will beat themselves up. They'll be like, okay, I'm trying to meditate, and I just can't empty my mind. So obviously I don't know how to do this. It's like, no, you watch the mind, you watch it go. And yes, you're going to have thoughts, and you kind of just watch them like they're going past you. And you do it enough times, I can tell you, at some point, you trick the mind into shutting off. Because you tell because you're not focusing on it. And at some point, whatever that space you're staring at is just that empty space. And the more that you do that, the more it has an impact on your everyday life. So anyway, yes, we are over time here, so I am going to say thank you guys so much. This was fun. We had kind of a nice interactive thing today, which I think is always great. And yeah, but anyway, so stay tuned for what I'm going to be putting out Kickstarter. A few people have already signed up for the intuitive development class that I'm doing this Sunday from 4 to 6 Eastern. My Tai Chi teacher had us go 30-minute standing meditation. Yeah, well, I mean, that's if you can do that. Some people can't do that and are daunted by that. So thanks, much love. Oh, you're welcome. And yeah, to me, it's like start small, but yeah, I just feel like wherever your inspiration is, and like I said, for me, I think my inspiration is just these kinds of days and stuff when nature's like this. But there can be other one. It's like vertical planking. Yeah. Oh, that meditation. Yeah, planking is something I can't do for more than 30 seconds, never mind 30 minutes. But it's yeah. So anyway, everybody have a great rest of your day. I will be back. Tomorrow is Friday. Yeah, I'm just trying to keep my day straight here. And yeah, and I'll certainly be having more on the school and everything coming up soon. But if you want to take the intuitive development class, it hurts. Yeah, I can imagine. It will be this Sunday from 4 to 6. There's still time to sign up. Like I said, I think I've got 3 people right now, but those are fun too in terms of, yeah, speaking of getting out of your head and getting out of that, I think we have some good things planned for that. So everybody have a great rest of your day, and we will see you tomorrow. Take care.